Charles, I don't beat my wife, Randall, bishop and overseer of the church formerly known as Solid Rock at Market Common and general handler of John Paul Miller, has been missing in action. At least he's been MIA in the USA, but I found him. Well, not in person, because that would be weird. Charles has been in Africa, more specifically in Kenya, and even more specifically in Jabrok. And if we want to be super specific, he was in a hole in the ground in Jabrok. According to the caption of the photo, he was in Jabrok laying the cornerstone for Faith First Academy. He went on a trip with a woman who is somehow related to his church. I'm not going to put her name or face out there because I don't know that she's necessary to Micah's case. We'll call her Darla. Kristen Fazio, former principal of former Faith First Academy in Myrtle Beach, the school affiliated with Solid Rock at Market Common, was also along for the trip. And here they are on the plane heading to Kenya. That Charles sure does love the camera, and it loves him right back. Here's when they landed in Nairobi, and it looks like they spent the night there before heading to Jabrok so Charles could lay that cornerstone. And about that, here's a better picture of Charles in the hole. And I hope he's not trying to make people think he was actually going to do any of the manual labor with those clothes on. And who is that with him? Is that Pastor Jumba? Yes, it is. And look at him rocking those spiffy New Balance dad shoes. You remember how back in May or June, people were talking about how Pastor Juma had allegedly said he hadn't received any of the mission money from Solid Rock? Well, he doesn't seem to be holding a grudge about it, does he? And wasn't this school already supposed to have been built? The Dare to Care website has been up for almost a year and has had this paragraph on it since the beginning. Quote, "Would you consider sponsoring a child in Jabrok? You can send them to Faith First Academy for a year with your support of $300. Your generosity will truly be a blessing to these children, offering them the opportunity to access quality education and build a brighter future." End quote. The way that reads, it sounds as though the school was already up, and if you paid $300 a year, you could sponsor a child to go to that school. And in this sermon from John Paul Miller on March 10th of 2024, he said this.
Last year, my wife, they went to Africa, had a wonderful trip, amazing trip, and she came back with the idea to start a school in Africa. And 6 weeks ago, she goes in the hospital, gets out, and just leaves, just completely leaves me, leaves everything, drains the bank account, and goes. And guess what? While you're talking bad about me out there, I'm building a school in Africa for over 100 kids to be able to be fed. I'm just doing that. I'm doing the work. Now listen.
And he even gave everyone a fake humble face. So precious. In October of 2024, the Dare to Care website read that John Paul Miller and Charles Randall were both part of the mission. But by the middle of November, John Paul's name was taken off. Their goal also went from 100 students to 300 students. I guess that was some kind of law of inverse proportions anomaly or something. The fewer entities involved, the more students you can have. I'm sure it was just a coincidence that John Paul's name was taken off of it after the FBI went to redecorate his house for him on November 1st. Is this part of the shuffling of funds that John Paul seems to have been doing lately? Maybe Uncle Charlie just wanted to help out his little protege. Perhaps the excuse for just now building a school is that sponsoring a child was really about getting enough money for the school. But it seems like they would use different wording for that. I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't want people to get the wrong impression. When the Dare to Care website was first published, it stated that, quote, "Dare to Care is the vision and heart of Micah Miller. Her vision was to help get FFA schooling all around the world. Dedicated to Micah Miller." Well, you'd think that if John Paul was sincere about Dare to Care being dedicated to Micah and about building a school, he would have done it way before now. I mean, he could afford to buy a DeLorean, and the church just plopped down $155,000 for a building, so why couldn't the church have shelled out the money to build a school? It's almost like John Paul didn't want to. In fact, it's like no one really wanted to build the school until the FBI entered the chat. Isn't that just the weirdest thing? I'm not sure what else Charles was up to in Kenya, but from pics I saw, it looked like Kristen and Darla were possibly staying at the Sarova Imperial Hotel in Kisumu. Now, it might not be the most expensive hotel in Oh, hang on. Yes, it is. It seems to be a pretty nice place, and it's definitely not what I expect for people on a mission trip. They also went sightseeing and even went to Lake Victoria, but That was easy because the hotel is right there by Lake Victoria. They also visited a school in Kisumu, and I'm not sure why, but it did make for a great photo op. Charles wasn't in any of the return trip photos, and I thought maybe he'd stayed in Kenya, but he's back home. We have had a Charles spotting. Charles was seen in North Myrtle Beach on Sunday, March 2nd by one of the protesters. Charles and his wife were in his SUV, and Charles was saying something to the protester while his wife was trying to avoid any confrontation. I wonder why he hasn't been to a single one of John Paul's court hearings. He stopped lugging his briefcase into the church formerly known as Solid Rock like he used to every Sunday, too. Why don't you want to be seen with your buddies, the Millers, anymore, Chuck? Do tell.